And now presidents of the U.S. and Russia have held their first official summit in Geneva, Switzerland. Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin sat down for face-to-face dialogue in the Swiss capital. In a press conference, Biden called a tone of talks good and positive, but said that he'll respond to actions that impair vital interests of his country and its allies. On human rights issue, Biden called Putin's criticism of the U.S. ridiculous. He also noted that Moscow will face devastating consequences if the jailed Russian opposition leader dies in prison. In a separate briefing, Putin said that both sides have agreed to begin consultations on cybersecurity. He accused the U.S. of being behind most cyber attacks throughout the world.
U.S. sources say that the largest number of cyber attacks in the world are carried out from the U.S. cyberspace. In second place is Canada, followed by two Latin American countries and then Great Britain. Russia is not included in this list of countries from which cyberspace the largest number of cyber attacks of various kind is carried out.
Putin described the talks with his American counterpart as constructive, but noted it's hard to say if relations with the U.S. will improve. The Russian leader also said that both sides have agreed to resume diplomatic ties and return expelled envoys to each other's capitals. Putin, however, rejected as unfounded Washington's concerns over Moscow's military presence in the Arctic and criticized the deployment of NATO forces to Russia's borders. Joining us now from New York is Max Parry, independent journalist. Hey, Max, always a pleasure to have you on Press TV, but hope you're doing well out there. Now, it's a tough read, isn't it? I mean, at least it has been for me. I've tried to go through at least a dozen sources to really get the gist of what that talk was really about. And it's pretty much split down the line. If it was, some say it was very constructive and positive, some say it was a mediocre disaster. What's your take on it, Max?
Well, going into the summit, even before it took place, there seemed to be sort of like a general agreement building that that this meeting between the two heads of state could finally mark some kind of a turning point in bilateral relations for the better, or that some progress could be made. But I myself am very pessimistic, despite the rhetoric by the two sides that these talks may be constructive. I myself am very pessimistic, just given the precedent set by recent history. As many of your viewers may recall, it was a decade ago, during Obama's first term, after the relations between the U.S. and Russia really began to sour during George W. Bush's second term and the 2008 war in Georgia. But there was supposed to be, in Obama's first term, there was supposed to be, a reset in relations between Moscow and Washington, where Sergei Lavrov and then U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton had a very memorable photo op to symbolize what was supposed to be an improvement in relations. But of course, as we all know, subsequently, the U.S. hostility towards Russia only accelerated. And in the years since, NATO has only continued to enlarge to now 15 countries, where Montenegro and North Macedonia most recently have been absorbed as member states, encroaching on Russia's borders, which they've made very clear is a red line. And of course, the U.S. also backed a coup in 2014 in Ukraine, overthrowing their elected pro-Russian president after he rejected a EU association agreement. And then, of course, Russia intervened in the war in Syria and thwarted the U.S. attempt to conduct regime change there. So, the proxy war has only continued to expand, and bilateral relations between the two countries have only gotten worse. So, just given the precedent set by recent history, where there was supposed to be a reset in U.S.-Russia relations, I think we could just be looking at another instance of window dressing, but nothing really substantive coming between the two countries diplomatically. You can only hope that at least some issues such as the global pandemic and the health crisis, or even climate change, there could be room for progress between the two countries. But even with the pandemic, we've seen the U.S. politicize the global immunization and stigmatize Russia's Sputnik vaccine and discourage many countries from acquiring it. So even in the midst of a global pandemic, the U.S. hasn't been willing to put aside politics and engage in some international cooperation for the sake of the entire world. So I myself am very pessimistic about any progress being made in this summit in Geneva.
And why do you think it is, Max, that the U.S. doesn't put that onus? I mean, it really can't, be good for the world to have Washington and Moscow and Beijing, such huge powers in the world at each other's throats. I mean, why isn't it important for the U.S., more important, I should say, to try to make it work with Moscow? I mean, you have someone like a Saudi Arabia, you call a friend or an ally, you have bases there. At the same time, they're chopping up people, that are their, opposition figures on that soil. And then, you got someone like you have an entity like Moscow. They have one of their opposition figures in jail, and then you lay into them. You're talking about sanctions and expelling, envoys because of it. And it's just funny, the hypocrisy. Why not make it work? I mean, isn't it more important for Washington to make it work within Moscow and let a few things slide than it is, within Israel or with Saudi Arabia?
No, I mean, you're absolutely right about the hypocrisy about the U.S. reasons for opposing Russia having anything to do with human rights. Of course, it has nothing to do with human rights, and it has to do with the fact that, it was Vladimir Putin that put a stop to the Western looting of post-Soviet Russia that occurred during the 1990s. And of course, he, as a statesman, began to push back against the expansion of NATO and stick up for Russia's interests, whatever anyone wants to say about his domestic policies in Russia. That's the real reason that he's drawn the ire of the political establishment in Washington. But I think fundamentally, you're right, it's putting the entire world in danger. We've seen how the International Atomic Energy Agency has sounded the alarm, and about how, the hand of the doomsday clock is growing ever closer to midnight. I think it has to do with the fact that, the geopolitical aims between Russia and the U.S. are incompatible. The full spectrum dominance that the U.S. has enjoyed since the end of the Cold War is coming to an end, and we're seeing the emergence of a new multipolar world with China as the global economic superpower, and the return of Russia to the world stage as well. And Washington is desperate to maintain the international order that it's enjoyed since the end of the Cold War, and we're really seeing a decline in U.S. hegemony. So I think that, as far as any change coming from this summit, I remain pessimistic about any developments. I think we're going to have to see actions and not words as far as if there's going to be any change between relations between the U.S. and Moscow.
All right, thanks, bud. Stay safe till we hear from you again. From New York, Mr. Max Parry there joining us.